Good morning. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Alrighty, I'm Kirsten from Milkwood, and this morning we are going to talk about how to create a resilient garden and a diverse garden, and why planting and planning for resilience and diversity matters in your garden, and how to create that, whether you're windowsill gardening or patio gardening, or you've got a big backyard patch, or even if you're lucky enough to have paddocks or acres. There's lots and lots you can do to bring diversity into your growing space, and by extension benefit both your backyard patch and your wider ecosystem, which, is exactly what we want. So first of all, why does diversity matter? Now, I'm sure if you're here with me now, you've got a fairly good sense of why diversity in our ecosystems and in our backyards matter. But it's not just about planting different veggies, although that's a great part of diversity, and polycultural plantings, or finding ways to mix up what's being planted in your garden and create as much diversity in your actual veggie plantings, is obviously part of this, right? But the diversity that comes from lots of garden visitors, diverse pollinators, diverse small birds, and all the other visitors and residents in our ecosystem, that having those ones in your garden, in there with you, that's what starts to create true resilience in your garden, because your garden starts to function as a small part of the wider ecosystem. So basically anything you can do to help make that happen is a good thing. And happily and luckily, there's some really, really simple strategies that you can use to, even, like I said, even if you're just starting on your back porch, there's lots of things you can do to slowly contribute to and create diversity where you live. Okay, so first of all, who are we trying to attract here? What are we talking about when we talk about diversity and resilience in a garden? So we're trying to attract pollinators, first of all, and that is everything from bees, native bees, wasps, some ladybirds, butterflies, all the beautiful insects and small birds as well, that come into our gardens and are responsible for the fertility of our gardens, in the sense of them pollinating all the different parts of our gardens. So obviously, if you have your prize tomatoes, let's say, and you'd like them to be, maybe not tomatoes, maybe that's not the best example. We'll go with tomatoes. Anyway, if you want them to be well pollinated, it's not just about having the crop that you want pollinated in your garden and hoping that the pollinators all, come from far away and go, hey, I think there's a tomato way over there. It's not about that. It's about creating a party for the pollinators, so to speak. If your garden is a party for pollinators, if it's got flowers and it's got flowering trees and it's got understories and it's got lots and lots and lots of things and food and pollen and nectar for the pollinators to eat, your garden is going to be where the pollinators want to show up. And by extension, they will be pollinating all your food plants and the things that you really, really need pollinated in order to get a crop, in order to get a yield. So always think about that. Whenever you're planting a veggie garden, factor in flowers, factor in lots of flowering plants and the sorts of plants that pollinators love. And that will increase the fertility of your backyard, the fertility of your veggie patch, and by extension, your resilience and your community's resilience, because you are taking care of pollinators and you're creating a healthier ecosystem. So that's probably the easiest way if you want to start. Plant some flowers as well as some carrots, but also plant carrots. Carrots are great. Yes. All right. Small birds are another really important part of diversity in a small garden. And there's lots of ways that you can bring small birds into your garden, and we'll get to them in a minute. Good bugs. Good bugs are essential. So by good bugs, we mean the sorts of insects that predate on the bad bugs, without being too black and white about it, and support the health of your plants and of your garden by their presence. So we're talking about things like lacewings, ladybirds, some wasps. There's a whole lot of amazing good bugs that come in and actually eat or lay their eggs in scales or aphids, or although there are some good aphids, but that gets a bit tricky. There's all these bugs that can come into your garden and really, really help again, with your garden's health and your vegetables' health as well. So figuring out how to attract them, and we'll go through that. Figuring out how to attract them is another excellent way of creating both fertility and stability in your garden. And then there's all the other garden visitors. There's things like lizards and various other wildlife, not all of whom you want in your garden. Some of them you want them, a little bit in the wilder space than right in your veggie patch. But for things like lizards and that sort of thing, they eat slugs, they eat snails. They're fantastic to have in your garden. And it's worth thinking how you can design or how you can shift how your garden works by creating habitat and, creating a safe space for lizards and frogs and other useful garden visitors, which both increase your garden diversity and also protect your veggie patch, which is, a win-win for everyone. Okay, so some of the basic strategies to increase diversity in your garden include water. Water is life, obviously, and everyone needs to drink it from, well, not all insects, most insects, birds, lizards, everyone loves water. So getting some sort of water into your garden is fantastic. There's notes and links in the blog post to different ways you can do this, but these things include making a bee waterer for insects so that they can drink when it's dry and there isn't enough nectar around, which is a way of introducing good insects into your garden even when there isn't a huge amount of pollination happening, which is fantastic. Or making a garden pond, which again, there's some links for in the article, or making a backyard bird bath. I know, we've all seen the 80s bird baths. We're like, not a bird bath. But it doesn't have to be like that. They can be amazing spaces. And once you introduce permanent water into your backyard, the amount of garden visitors that you will see will skyrocket. It's actually incredible. I guess from a lot of birds' perspective, they're seeing it as a bit of a mirror. And, it's like a magnet. It's a diversity magnet, and all the excellent flow-ons that come from that, not the least of understanding a bit more about who you're living in your ecosystem with in terms of what other species is, very well worth doing if you possibly can, if you have the space, which I bet you do. Alrighty, a safe bed for the night is something else that will really encourage diversity and garden visitors. By this, you might want to build a bug hotel or an Airbnb, as it's sometimes called. And there's links to how to build one of those in the article. And this is also about just creating habitat, whether for lizards that means a hollow log and keeping your dog out or your cat out of that area, or bundles of sticks, just being mindful, figuring out who else lives in your ecosystem. And for those that you would love to encourage into your garden, figure out what their habitat is, figure out where they sleep, figure out what they need, and creating that. It might be as simple as planting some thorny bushes on the side of your garden to create habitat for small birds so that they can hop out, or the wrens hop out and eat your caterpillars and then hop back into the spiny bushes so they're completely safe from predators. I've seen gardens thrive to life after planting those sorts of thicket barriers around them to encourage that permanent residence, if you like, of diversity to create a more resilient garden. So that's a main way as well. There's also the food factor. So you need to have things that the diverse species that you want in your garden like to eat. And again, that comes back to lots of flowers. So as much nectar as you can muster, pollen, all the other things, slugs, not that you want to encourage slugs, but finding ways to create a food bank for your pollinators especially. And then they can come in and, as I said, pollinate the rest of your food while they're busy feasting on all the other things you planted specifically for them. And of course, we're talking lots of flowers here. It's beautiful. Who doesn't want to live in a backyard or in an ecosystem that's got wildflowers or whatever flowers they are popping and locking all over the place? That's what we want. One more thing I will say before we go to some questions is always do your research as to what you think is a pest in your garden. In the blog, there's a little example that we had paper wasps under the eaves of our shed at one point, and we were like, that doesn't look good. They weren't a problem in terms of they weren't by our front door, so we weren't getting stung every day, but we're like, they look a bit scary. But then we did some research and we figured out, and we also observed that the paper wasps ate the green caterpillars off our brassicas. Like they would come in, they were nom, 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 eat it all up, and then what they didn't eat, they would take back and pack into the cells for their babies. And we were like, oh, wow, that's one of our best alliances where we were in this rental at this time, because we didn't have the opportunity to develop long-term strategies for creating diversity in that garden. But by just not removing what seemed to be a pest but was in fact a helpful predator, we were helping our garden. So before you remove any sort of pest from your garden, whether it be a scale or an aphid or a wasp or anything like that, do some research and figure out where that species fits into your ecosystem, what they predate on, what they eat, and just check. Like with aphids, some aphids feed on other aphids, so you want to encourage the good aphids to come along and eat the problematic aphids that might be sucking your tomatoes dry or whatever it is. Do your research. This is, again, part of becoming a resident in your ecosystem. And yeah, figure out what everyone does before you decide what to remove. This will also help you help others and spread the knowledge so that you can have a larger, more resilient and stable ecosystem around you, full of gardens where people know, oh, that's that sort of aphid and that's that sort of wasp, and everyone's down with it, and you can create more diversity and abundance together. Okay, so we have a few questions. The first one is from ABB33. Hi, and they said, I early planted my new mini veggie patch last week. Yay! And last night there was a very happy but well-hidden frog. No idea what sort. How can I identify frog croaks? Good idea. One good way to do that is to get an app. There is an app that's put out by the Australian Museum called Frog ID, and it is fantastic. You can scroll through and you can hit the frog and it will go meow, 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 and you can figure out what you have in your garden. And we've used that app and a few other apps, but Frog ID by the Australian Museum is really, really great for that. You could, of course, take a recording, ask a local Facebook group or an amphibian identifying group. That's fun too. But whatever you do, find a way to figure it out. But an app is a good place to start for that. Alrighty. Yes, Hoga was asking, hi, I would like to make one of those bug hotels. At what height do you install it? Good question. So within the sort of bug hotels that you'll find in the article, and there's a million trillion ways to make a bug hotel, we recommend, and well, the insect experts recommend, that you keep it between 1 and 2 meters off the ground, because the sorts of insects you're creating a home for are not ground insects. They are insects that fly up and, find a bed for the night in a wall or in a tree or whatever. So you're trying to work within the natural range of where they want to be. And the sort of bug hotels that we have instructions for on the blog or that you'll see around are generally focused on those sorts of bugs, the ones that are about 1 meter off the ground. You can put it a little higher than that, but just to let you know, if it's right on the ground, you won't attract the same sorts of visitors you're hoping to. And if it's way too high, then they're just not going to find it because they don't go up there. So good luck. Alrighty. Danny asks, what do I do about mosquitoes in my little pond? Good thought. So having water in your garden is, as I said, fantastic, but having mosquitoes in your garden is not as fantastic. If your body of water is large enough, one easy strategy is to get a few goldfish. Goldfish love eating mosquito larvae, and they are actually very resilient little fish in my experience. There's a bunch of other species you could choose as well, but always do your homework and figure out for your context and where you are what's a suitable fish and what's a not suitable fish. Another thing you can do is create as much frog habitat around your little pond as you can, because again, the diversity will balance out the problems. There's also a lot of really great books on this subject, but one that we have here is Edible Water Gardens, Growing Water Plants for Food and Profit by Nick Romanowski. This is a great book. We've had this book for about 10 years. There might be an updated version by now. But he goes through flowering and aquatic plants for larger scale ponds and for like natural swimming pools, or sort of getting up to sort of pondy, dammy, lakey level. But he also has a whole chapter on floating plants, plants for shallower waters, plants for waterlogged soils. So when we're talking about not quite a pond, but still a watery area, and making the most of that and making that into an abundant and edible yielding area of your land or your garden, which is fantastic. Plants for the water's edge, plants for seasonal wetlands, and other useful and profitable wetland plants. So that is going sort of up to farm scale in this book, but it's also fantastic and totally applies to the backyard scale for water features and ponds. So check that out. I'll put some notes in the blog post about that one. Alrighty. Denise asks, hi Denise, I would be extremely grateful if you have plant selections that would help combat red scale, please. Right. So red scale is a scale that affects citrus trees, and it can be a bit nasty. One of the ways that people control it with is a sort of an eco oil, essentially, if you don't want to go with harsh chemicals, which of course you don't. There's also there's a bunch of insects that will predate, wasps particularly, that will lay their eggs inside the red scale, and then their babies, when they hatch, will eat the red scale. Now those sorts of wasps all are nectar eating wasps. So we have a two-pronged approach here. What you want is to be creating as much nectar forage as possible for those wasps, so they're feeding in your garden, which means that they take up your garden as their habitat and then lay their eggs in the red scale that you're trying to control. You can also use, because the ants are a part of this too, the ants are often farming the aphids. You can get a horticultural glue, which you basically put around the bottom of your citrus tree, around the trunk, and that stops the ants being able to get up into your citrus tree. If you have that capability, there's some non-toxic options there. But having habitat for the nectar-eating wasps who will lay their eggs in your scale is the best thing. There's lots and lots of different flowers that you can plant for to attract these sorts of wasps. But I've got to give a big shout out to Green Harvest Gardening, which are a seed company in Australia, and they do this fantastic mix called the Good Bug Mix. And the Good Bug Mix, I've written it down here. What's it got in it? Good Bug Mix contains colourful reseeding annual and perennial flowers, including red clover, alyssium, cosmos, marigolds, Queen Anne's lace, buckwheat, lucerne, dill, caraway, coriander, and a bunch of others. So this, you can buy it as a mix. If you don't live in Australia or you can't access this for whatever reason, get on the Green Harvest website and have a look at the ingredients in the Good Bug Mix, and then see if you can replicate it or make up a similar mix yourself. We've used this mix for years and years and years around the edges of gardens and around the edges of market gardens as well. And what you get is this woof. It's like an instant wildflower meadow. And before you know it, because all the different species in the Good Bug Mix, are flowering at slightly different times, it's like having a pollinator band around your garden, and it's a party in there. There's so much delicious action happening, and then all those pollinators and predatory wasps and lacewings and all the other cool cats that we want in our garden are going on to, like, oh, what's over there? It's the tomatoes. And off they go, and up goes the abundance in your garden. So do check out Good Bug Mix. It's a fantastic mix, and they're a fantastic seed company in Australia that we all need to support. On that, I just wanted to share one of my favourite all-time books about this sort of thing. It's The Wilderness Garden by Jackie French. I'm not sure where it was written, quite some time ago, I suspect. At, what does it say? 1992. Oh, it's not too bad. Okay, so Jackie's book here, Feeding Your Garden, Dealing with Pests, Living with Weeds, The Flower Garden. It's very much, Jackie lives in Braidwood in sort of southern eastern New South Wales, and she's very much got a focus on, like, she's a fantastic elder of the permaculture movement, and gardening and living in fire landscapes and, you know, wombat care, and there's not much that Jackie French doesn't know. And she writes a million kids' books and a million other fantastic gardening books as well. This book is really great if you can get hold of it, because it has the attitude of your garden as an ecosystem, which is what we've been talking about. But yeah, it's from someone who's been doing this for a very, very long time, and I highly recommend this book. It's a lovely, gentle exploration of gardening and food gardening in the context of an ecosystem, and rather than trying to push the ecosystem or the wilderness or the wildlife to the edges of your garden and going, get out of here, this is mine. Incorporating them, or just accepting that when we garden in anything other than an inner urban environment, and even then we get all sorts of garden visitors that we may not have expected, that you are in league with the ecosystem and you are a part of the ecosystem while you are creating that garden, and there's no way out of that. So you may as well design within those parameters and celebrate them and make the most of them. Alrighty, so I'm going to add a bunch of resources that we've just chatted about to the blog post, which will be down there, which will be linked to this video. Thank you so much for coming, and we will see you next time. Alrighty, have a great weekend, and don't forget to garden.